Welcome back. Just as it used to be when you were here, Harvard Business School starts early every morning. The Harvard Business School began 100 years ago in 1908 in the depths of a severe recession. There was real uncertainty in Harvard University at that time. They had just closed a professional school. They suspended work on the stadium and the athletic grounds on the other side of North Harvard Street. And yet, they decided it was the time to found a totally new kind of school, a graduate school of business education, whose mission would be to develop leaders for companies, financial institutions, and others. It was, looking back on it, I think, an act of real courage at the time. Some thought it was an act of foolhardiness. You'll recall Warren told us Sunday night that it was actually founded as a 5-year experiment, as a compromise between those who believed in the idea and those who thought it was foolhardy. The name that the leadership of Harvard University gave to this, they called it a delicate experiment. That's academic talk for it's sure to fail. And you might say, why? Why did they think that? Well, think about it. At the time, there actually were many business schools already. The business schools that existed at the time were trade schools. They were 2-year schools, sometimes 2.5-year schools, where you sent your slower son to learn accounting, maybe a little inventory control, a few other entry-level skills. The sons, they were all sons in those days, that you thought could succeed and become leaders, you sent to the university for a 5-year undergraduate education. That's what business schools meant in 1908. This was a totally different idea. This was an idea to take those students who had already been to a university and had perhaps worked for a year or two after that university and try to, in fact, train them to become the leaders of America. That was a radically different notion that some thought sure to fail. After all, how would you do that? I mean, how would you think about how one should educate leaders? Leadership has something to do with judgment, we heard yesterday. But how do you teach judgment? Leadership has something to do with an entrepreneurial perspective, a vision, a sense of opportunity. But how do you teach that? Leadership has a lot to do with communication skills. How do you teach those? Leadership has a lot to do with values, with integrity, with the courage to act. How do you teach that? They were pretty clear they knew what they didn't want to do. They knew what wouldn't work, and that was to teach in the conventional way of the time. Large lecture halls with professors lecturing on various topics. That wasn't going to work. But if not that, what? Truth is, this school actually struggled for a while with what would that be all about, and in fact had some difficulties in the first decade or so of its existence. It was in the 1920s when the school began to come into its own. First of all, it really developed what we know today as the case method, the notion of participatory learning, students learning from each other as they dissect complicated and complex problems. Second of all, it developed a research methodology where the research was more closely tied to practice, to what was relevant in the world of business. Thirdly, we got a new campus. We separated ourselves from the economics department and came across the river to what was at the time marshland. And in that campus, with that pedagogical structure and with a new research agenda, became a real school, but a distinctive school quite different than the rest of the university and quite different from what were the other business schools at the time. The 1920s was an energized environment as all that came together, and that model was widely copied across other schools in America and beyond. The 30s, 40s, and 50s, as we know, were different decades where this school met a number of different challenges that arose in the environment. It was really in the 1960s that it once again came into its own. I was here in the 1960s, and it was an exciting time. Although looking back on it, it appears almost quaint by today's standards. When I was a student here in 1966, I came in 1966, 9,000 MBAs graduated that year worldwide, 9,000 worldwide. This last June, 156,000 students graduated with MBAs in the United States alone, and countless others at new business schools all around the world. In fact, the MBA has become the growth market of higher education, surpassing all other professional education by leaps and bounds. And it hasn't just been that it's been the growth market of higher education. But in fact, if you look at what MBA means, there has been remarkable product proliferation during those same time periods. For example, while this school still clings to the notion of a two-year MBA, if you look around this country and around the world, there are many other models. There are one-year MBAs, there are 16-month MBAs, there are 18-month MBAs, there are weekend MBAs, there are evening MBAs, that are executive MBA programs. You can buy an MBA on the internet for $59. It's actually a bargain. I would recommend it for those of you who want the cheap way of doing this. $59 is a pretty good price. You'll find all the facts and theories there. It's a very crowded marketplace where the very label MBA has become increasingly proliferated. But the Harvard Business School, within that marketplace, is distinctive. First of all, it's the faculty who remain close to practice and, more importantly, committed to the teaching process in our classroom. It's the engaged classroom where students are responsible for their own learning and for teaching each other, not just listening to the faculty. It's a learning model, not a teaching model. It's a residential campus. As you look around here at the buildings, they're all carefully designed to foster a unique sense of community. We work hard on that. The notion of a residential campus where people think and work with each other 24 hours a day is really important to our model. My proudest moment each year is Admit Day at the Harvard Business School. The students who we admit, we invite to come back to campus and visit with us for a day, attend classes, talk to our students, talk to some of our faculty, get the feeling of the place. They do that here and in the other schools to which they're admitted. At the end of that day, I sometimes like to sit down and talk with small groups of them. What they say is amazing. They say, we wouldn't have believed it. We wouldn't have believed it is so different. It really is what your website says. In a world where websites make the grandest of claims, what we read there, we think, turns out to be so. It is a different, engaged learning model, and this is where we want to be. Looking towards the future, the next 100 years, is probably the most important thing this centennial is all about. And I think and believe that there are at least 4 things that this school needs to figure out how to do much better. Let's talk about each of them. First of all, the world continues to become a much more global place, particularly the world of business. And we need to keep up with that. We need to continue to work, just as we have since the very origins of this school, on becoming more global. Second of all, we need to think hard about the industries of the future, particularly the knowledge-based businesses that are going to be the leading firms 30 years from now. We also have to figure out how to collaborate with other Harvard schools, jointly pursuing important problems. And finally, we have to develop the kind of faculty and students who can react to the kind of crisis we're now in. I want to talk about each of these this morning. First of all, let's take the issue of how do we continue to work on becoming global. First of all, let's look at some pictures of students yesterday and today. This is a classroom in my day. Look at the faces. Imagine the names. Can you believe we looked like that? I believe this was taken in 1964. I'm not sure about that. It's 1964, plus or minus a year or two. Well, you notice that we were a mixed gender place even then. Do you notice the young woman on the right? Doesn't she look happy? It must have been awful for her. I don't recall her. There were a couple women in my section who kind of looked like that, as I remember. Let's look today. Do you notice any differences? The most interesting thing is the names. You're probably not able to read them. I'll read that first full row. Dee Bai, Sid Chennai, Orkin Killick, Dave Kang, and the last one is obscured. I'll make it up, Payan Shudke. Let me ask you a question. If I told you 2 of those students are international and 3 are as American as apple pie, which ones? So a third of our students are now from other countries, or to probably say it more carefully, carry other passports. It isn't actually clear what's international and what's domestic these days. Even our American students, by the way, on average, have had 1.5 important foreign assignments, say 2 years in Paris or Munich or London, and 1.5 years in Singapore, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Shanghai. It's an amazing group of students that's a little different than that group back there. When I was here, I had not yet traveled outside of the United States. I think that was probably true of many of us, other than those who had been in the service. So it's a very interesting and different group of students. Let's look at the faculty. Here's the faculty a couple years ago. As you can see, it was also mixed gendered. You see her way back in the corner there? Can you make her out in the corner on the right-hand side? She too looks happy and engaged. I can't believe those guys. I can't believe it ever really looked like that. This is, by the way, the entire faculty of the Harvard Business School. I think in the late 40s. I'm not sure of the time period of this. The entire faculty of the Harvard Business School. Here's the faculty now. What this is a picture of it's actually not quite our entire faculty. It's the entire group of faculty that joined us last year. You can't read the names unless your eyes are much better than mine, so I'll just start off the top row, starting from the top left. Juan Alcacer from Colombia. Sadal Bayan, born in Ethiopia, raised in the Midwest. Thierry Breton, former finance minister of France. Francois Brochette, also from Paris. Lauren Cohen from Brooklyn. We got one. Mercedes Delgado Garcia, Ranjay Gulati. Well, you've got the sense of it. It is a different kind of group. It's much more global. It's much more interesting. It's much more diverse in any way that one can possibly imagine. And we're very proud of them. But you know, you can have a more international student body and you can have a more international faculty. And what goes on in the classroom isn't necessarily very global. That's not really the criteria, although it sure helps. The other thing you need are ideas about globalization. The other thing you need are cases that come from around the world. The other thing you need is to get people talking about the challenges of building businesses in a time when business has become truly global. And we're working hard on that too. These are the locations of the research centers that we have around the world. We have 6 main research centers around the world, including the most recent one we just opened up in Shanghai, which works hand in hand with our Asia Pacific research center located in Hong Kong. Plus, as you can tell from the map, we have one in Silicon Valley at Palo Alto too. We consider Silicon Valley to be part of our global strategy. At least it looks that way from Cambridge. These are the places where we have research assistants and research associates working under the guidance of faculty who spend most of their time back here in Cambridge, but who in fact fly out to these centers from time to time. They're producing cases, they're producing research, they're helping us pursue a truly global intellectual generation process that drives not only the research of this school, but its cases and its curriculum. Last year, for example, in these centers, we produced, and also in Boston, 160 global field cases. Cases about truly global firms pursuing different ideas, different strategies in different countries. We also produced about 40 other pieces of pedagogical material that are used in the classrooms, and we produced 80 papers, 80 research papers of various kinds, all of these with a global focus. The intellectual agenda of the school, which is what ultimately drives the faculty, what ultimately drives the curriculum, what ultimately drives the engaged process that goes on in our classroom, is really based heavily on this kind of a global footprint. Beyond that, we're beginning to teach executive education programs around the world. We do a significant amount in partnership with other schools in China, in both Beijing and Shanghai. We do a significant amount in India. We do a significant amount in Europe. We put faculty on airplanes. These programs are largely 2-week or 1 weeks. They're relatively short programs. Our faculty are not in residence in these places, but they do, in fact, teach, importantly, senior executives, often CEOs of countries in those foreign locations. You might say, why are you doing that? After all, it's perfectly possible that the mix of senior executives you get there is less global than the ones you have in Boston, and that would be true. It's often focused on a particular geographic area. But the reason, if you reflect upon it, is very clear. What this school needs to do is build the same kinds of networks abroad that it did so well in this country many years ago. We need to know the CEOs. We need to know the senior executives. Our faculty need to be teaching them and to understand what the world looks like from the point of view of the CEO of an Indian company who's producing tractors in Poland to be sold in Canada. From the point of view of a Hong Kong-based company that's producing textiles to be eventually exported to the United States. From the point of view of a United States company that is producing things in Southeast Asia to be sold in Eastern Europe. Those are the kinds of global challenges that our faculty need to understand, and we have to go abroad to have contact with the kinds of CEOs and senior executives we need to have contact with if we are going to drive that intellectual agenda forward. You can imagine trying to get a good controversial case from the CEO of a Chinese company. I've had this experience several times. Walk into a Chinese company and through a translator say, we'd love to do a case on your company. What do you suppose the response is? You've got to be kidding me. The worst thing that could happen is they say yes, because of course they mean no. And you spend 2 years trying to do it, ultimately frustrated by your inability to get at the real story. But suppose that CEO had been to an executive program, one that you ran in Beijing, 2 weeks in Beijing, 2 weeks in Shanghai, 2 weeks in Boston. Suppose they had spent 6 weeks doing 3 cases a day, every day, as part of an engaged learning process, and talked to the CEOs of other companies whose cases were talked about in that engaged learning environment. Do you think that would change their view? That's how we build a network. And we're building networks of people, of leaders all around the world that are part of the intellectual agenda of this school. That's how we did it early in the century in America. That's how we're doing it all around the world today. We also have MBAs that in the month of January go to other locations, to Shanghai, to Europe, to India, to Mexico, to Israel. Each year the places are somewhat different. We call these immersion programs. They study in the morning. They talk with companies and CEOs in the afternoon. We're told they do some other things in the evening. We're not sure because the faculty go to bed and hope to get up early the next morning. These are incredible programs that we are going to try to weave very tightly into the intellectual context of the rest of our MBA program, an opportunity to get students to other parts of the world they may not understand so well and expose them to ideas, to firms, to people that are part of our global network. Someday, maybe someday soon, we hope to have classrooms in some of those cities that house not only the executive programs we do, but some of the MBA immersion programs we do. We think that will be an important part of our emerging global footprint. Not campuses, but single classrooms where we can carry out the very important network building that needs to be done. At the end of the day, it's still all about leadership, but the very definition of leadership changes as one moves to a more global world. It's critical for this school to make sure it understands what the evolving questions are there so it can continue to educate the kind of leaders that we need. A second thing we need to do much better is knowledge-based businesses. If you think about where this country is going, think about the panel yesterday morning and the kinds of companies and industries they were talking about as things this country should be betting upon. Largely, they're going to be knowledge-based businesses. Healthcare is a good example, one where we've been active now for the past few years. We now have a joint MD-MBA program we do jointly with the Harvard Medical School, with 25 of the absolute smartest students you can ever imagine spending 5 years getting that joint degree. We do executive education programs focused on the 42-year-old medical leader who's just become the chairman of an important department in a major medical center and frankly has no clue about how to proceed with the job of leadership. A really important task for us to collaborate with our friends at the medical school and the School of Public Health in understanding how to train that group of leaders. We have over 30 faculty who are interested in the healthcare area. And by the way, it's the third largest career choice of our students behind consulting and financial services. We need to do much more there. Also, the life sciences and much more broadly science-based businesses are a really important thing that we're pursuing hard with faculty, with ideas, with courses, with other kinds of work. Let me show you an example of what we're doing there. This is a team of students from a course called, I can't quite read the title, Invention, Breakthroughs, and Commercializing Science. As you can see, my eyes are not so good with these lights. I've got it now. Inventing Breakthroughs and Commercializing Science. Let me tell you what the course is really all about. The students, there are about 60 of them. This is one team. They're broken up into teams of approximately 6. They study in the first part of the course a set of cases about particularly important inventions and how they were brought to the marketplace, how really breakthrough inventions were commercialized. And then as a team, they go out through the university trying to find current inventions, current ideas, and for the rest of the year they do a project on how would you commercialize that idea. This particular team has put together a thing called Diagnostics for All. On this team are 3 MBAs, 2 MDs, 2 PhDs, a law school, and someone from the School of Public Health. Most of them have multiple advanced degrees. The leader of the team is the woman in the middle there. What they've done is take an idea out of George Whiteside's lab across the river. And the idea is basically, you can see it on the right-hand side balanced on a finger. The idea is to put in place an ultra-low-cost way of diagnosing important diseases in the developing world. What they found is that using a new technology out of an important laboratory here at Harvard University, they can build a technology that suffuses chemicals in a small square of paper. And then they can go to, let's say, South Africa. The diagnosis now looks like this. Prick the finger of the possible patient, put the little piece of paper on, and depending on what colors those little nodes turn, you've diagnosed whether they have tuberculosis or malaria or AIDS or other diseases for for a cost of less than a penny a diagnosis. This technology is going to replace million-dollar laboratories in huge vans that were trucked around the developing world. They've decided to pursue it as a nonprofit. It's been funded in part by the Gates Foundation and by some other generous funders, and they are on their way. They have, by the way, won not only the Harvard Business School Business Plan contest, the social enterprise track, but also the MIT $100,000 business plan contest, the first team really in the history of Boston to sweep the boards in both of those business plan contests. They are a remarkable group of young people who we are very proud of. They really are already, just a few months out of this school, a group of students who are going to make a difference in the world. By the way, one of them is from Kansas City. Can you guess which one? That's also an example of collaboration across the university, and we need to do much more of that. Part of it is a question of the campus. Let's think about the evolution of our campus, because real estate is going to have something to do with it. This is a picture of our campus, not unlike the ones that Warren showed Sunday night. This is the campus just as the site is being cleared for our new school. So it would be about 1926 or so. Here we are today. This is an aerial shot. You can see the school up there on the other side of the stadium, surrounded by some awfully attractive industrial plots. Harvard University has now acquired most of those plots, indeed almost all of them. So Harvard now owns more land on this side of the river than on the other side of the river. This is what we believe it will look like in 30 years. This is the plan. Note that the business school has now become surrounded by the other professional schools at Harvard. We had been the outer Mongolia of Harvard for many decades. Those plumbers on the other side of the river, those barbarians, as viewed from the very center of the university, the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. They are having a good deal of psychological difficulty dealing with the fact that we are going to become the center of the university 30 years from now. This tent that we are sitting in today will be almost the exact geographic center of Harvard University 30 years from now. And we think that will make a profound difference, not only in the university, but in this school. And it's not just a question of real estate and what we're contiguous to. The other thing that's going on is a broader agenda has to shape up for this school and for other professional schools. What we know is that the professional schools of Harvard are dedicated, among other things, to solving some of the most important societal problems of our time. Problems of healthcare, problems of education, problems of global poverty and beyond. And the other thing that we've all come to know is that leadership is a really important part of how you get things done in all of those places. And leadership is what we know how to address. So I think as you think about this school going forward, both intellectually and geographically in a real estate sense, it will more and more become the center of a cluster of professional schools here at Harvard, dedicated to the proposition of how does one think about leadership in a broader context. There's also much more to be done in other kinds of venues too. Take, for example, the financial crisis we're currently in. As a school, much like the rest of the world, we probably did not understand just how fragile the financial system has become. We've talked quite a bit about that financial crisis during these several days. It's clear that what has to happen is an important version of developing leaders who make a difference in the world. In the short run, we need to stabilize the system. We've clearly made important progress on that in the last several days. More needs to be done there, but I'm relatively confident we can get that done. Our faculty is indeed involved in that process in several important ways. The next step is to think about the surgery that needs to be done. Exactly how should capital be injected? Exactly how should some of those toxic assets be purchased? Exactly what will be the near-term fix? That's something that will take us out for the next 6 months, and again, something this school needs to be involved in, both in terms of our alumni and faculty's involvement directly in the process, but in terms of the kind of intellectual engagement we have here for our students on campus. And finally, the financial system will be very different. I can assure you it will not look anything like it has in the last 15 years. But exactly what that means and who will lead and who will do what financial functions will in fact be importantly mapped out by the very students that are on our campus right now. And we need in fact to change our educational process and to offer educational opportunities that help the students here today become important participants in the process. Note that all of these things in fact involve leadership. In fact, they're all different manifestations of what the overriding objective of this school is: to educate leaders who make a difference in the world. As you think about what we really try to do here in the classrooms, I think it comes down to 5 things. First of all, being a leader requires developing judgment. The ability to look at complex, uncertain, ambiguous situations and work out a sense of priorities, work out a sense of what are the right questions to ask. Not what are the answers to the questions. That's the easy part. The hard part is, what are the priorities? What questions should I be asking? Where should I start trying to unravel? The second part of leadership, I think, is having an entrepreneurial perspective. By that I mean not getting tied bound by the constraints and problems of the current time, and having a vision, having a way of redefining the challenge that in fact turns it into the kind of opportunity for growth that it can become. Thirdly, the ability to communicate, primarily the ability to listen carefully, to really hear, and then to respond, and to respond in a compelling and persuasive way that leads large organizations. Fourthly, values, character, and integrity, and understanding the role that thinking about those things plays in trying to solve very messy problems with conflicting objectives and conflicting constituencies. And finally, the courage to decide and the courage to act. At the end of the day, when the analysis is done, it's time to make the call and to have the courage to make the call and move on. Those are the 5 things that I believe we try to do. And you can't do those in a lecture hall, but you can do those 3 times a day, every day for 2 years, putting students in situations where in fact they're called upon to do all 5 of those things. That's what we do here. That's what we do every day here. That's what we have been doing every day here for a long, long time. The Harvard Business School strategy has changed over the decades, and it will continue to change for sure right now. Change, yes, but stay focused. Innovate and lead, but stay true to the distinctive values of this institution. It's different this time, new challenges, but at another level, it isn't. It's in fact right where we started many years ago. At the end of the day, it's all about this. This is a scene from the classroom of Bill George, professor of management practice, MBA 1966, former CEO of Medtronic, who teaches leadership here today. This is his classroom. It's about a committed faculty person. It's about engaged students learning from each other. It's about a learning process, not a teaching process. It's about a learning process that transforms our students. Transformed me, transformed you. I believe it's transforming them this year with the group we have on campus today. It's what we keep doing differently each decade, but it's still the same. It's what makes this place such a very special place. Thank you for being part of the community that makes all of this possible. We're so pleased to have you here for these 3 days. Now it's my honor and my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Do you remember that slide I just showed you, Bill George teaching leadership? The central message of that course is it's about personal leadership styles. The central message is you've got to be, in his words, an authentic leader. And the course is about what does that all mean and how do you do that? Let me introduce you to someone who is an authentic leader, in the words of Bill George. She is a good friend of this school. She's a supporter of this school. She's a good friend of mine personally and of many of the people here at this school. She is Drew Faust, now in her second year as the 28th president of Harvard University. Drew.
It's a great honor for me to be here on this historic occasion. When I arrived at Harvard University just about 8 years ago, I found myself welcomed by the business school and by the then dean, Kim Clark, and he was a wonderful support and source of wisdom for me. In the years since he stepped down, Jay has fulfilled very much the same role and now is my close advisor and associate in my role as president. So it's a particular pleasure for me to be able to thank both of them and everyone at Harvard Business School here today. When Jay invited me over a year ago to speak at this event, I was honored and looked forward to it, but I think few of us anticipated the circumstances under which we would be celebrating this important anniversary. We are in the midst of a crisis that fundamentally challenges our understanding of business, finance, and the world economy. Nearly every day has brought surprising and unsettling developments as venerable institutions have disappeared or been transformed, as governments have assumed previously unimagined responsibilities, and as all of us have wondered what this means for our lives, for our nation, and for the world. During these uncertain days, we gather to celebrate the centennial of Harvard Business School. So in more than one respect, this is a historic occasion, and it's fitting that we consider the lessons of the past as we confront our future. On April 10th, 1933, the Harvard Business School community gathered in Memorial Church in Harvard Yard for a rather subdued launch of the school's 25th anniversary celebration. As the Harvard Business School Alumni Bulletin later reported, and I quote, "It was plainly evident that the speakers and the audience felt that the university, the business school, and the country at large had bade farewell to a state of things that probably would never be seen again." One of the featured speakers that day was Wallace Donham, then in his 14th year as HBS dean. His address was entitled, "The Failure of Business Leadership and the Responsibility of Universities." And the talk bemoaned what he called the inability of business and political leadership to rise to new heights required by the unprecedented situation the nation faced, a situation now familiar to us as the Great Depression. Donham was very moderate by nature, but he urged bold policies, as he put it. Bold anything, he said, is needed at this time. In June of 1933, with Roosevelt newly in office, Donham warned in a speech to local businessmen, "Everything ahead of us is dangerous. There isn't a power the president has asked for that isn't dangerous. But there isn't a power or combination of powers he has asked for so dangerous as continuing to do nothing." Not surprisingly, perhaps, Dean Donham believed that the most pressing concern of the day was the need to equip American business leadership with skills and breadth of vision to reach beyond narrow economic self-interest and to pursue business objectives in a way that would contribute to social stability and progress. For Donham, it was not enough for executives to understand their own businesses. Rather, he thought they needed to grasp industries as a whole. And more fundamental still, they needed an understanding of the relationship between their particular interests and broader economic and social structures. The guiding purpose of business education was, in his view, to provide a new class of leaders with the specialized knowledge of marketing, production, finance to manage the modern corporation, but also with the breadth of vision to make business a force for social good. In this project, university-based business schools had a very special role to play. The central purpose of the Harvard Business School was to make a profession of business, which meant that the project would be pursued in a university environment where this new class of professionals would be exposed to intellectual rigor, to a wide range of disciplines, and to diverse points of view. In short, HBS would educate manager-statesmen motivated not just by profit, but by the improvement of society. As HBS today states its mission, we educate leaders who make a difference in the world. This mission has a new urgency. Until now, business students have graduated with great confidence. They joined the fraternity of Masters of the Universe, as Tom Wolfe dubbed them in The Bonfire of the Vanities. They created a world in which the market became the organizing metaphor. But today, markets are disordered, and we are working frantically to fix a broken financial system. Never have we more needed leaders who make a difference. But how do we shape them? And how do we determine the sort of difference they will make? The university and the business school have from the outset been partners in the project of management education. And we will share the challenge of defining our common course for the decades ahead. What do we have to offer one another, our students, and the world? Here I'm reminded of the story of the stonecutters, which I came across in the writings of Peter Drucker, but which I gather is something of an old chestnut in management circles. Let me tell you the story. A man came across 3 stonecutters and asked them what they were doing. The first replied, "I am making a living." The second kept on hammering while he said, "I am doing the best job of stone cutting in the entire county." The third looked up with a visionary gleam in his eye and said, "I am building a cathedral." The first stonecutter is simply doing a day's work for a day's pay, for the material reward he receives in exchange for his labor. The substance of his work, the purpose of his work, the context of his work do not matter. The second stonecutter has higher aspirations. He wants to be the best. We know him well. Harvard does an outstanding job of producing students like the second stonecutter. Yearly, each of our schools enrolls a highly talented student body, and we entrust them to a faculty working at the very frontier of human knowledge. We demand that these students and faculty be excellent, for we see Harvard's own excellence reflected in them and their achievement. HBS is no different. It admits a small fraction of its thousands of applicants, and it turns out graduates who command the best jobs in finance, banking, consulting, marketing, brilliant, analytical, highly trained, driven. They are creative and pragmatic actors who have helped bring about one of the most sustained and extraordinary periods of prosperity in our history. Now, many of those graduates are to be found in the midst of this crisis and in the midst of the efforts to resolve it. The second stonecutter is an unshakable individualist. He believes in the power of the human mind, in its capacity for reason, in the drive for quality and results, in the usefulness of reducing the complex reality to a simple equation. His world is competitive and meritocratic. It's cosmopolitan. He measures himself, he says, against the whole county, as the story has it, even the whole world. Yet somehow the vision of the second stonecutter is incomplete. The focus on the task, the competition, the virtuosity is a kind of blindness. Consumed with individual ambition, the second stonecutter misses the fundamental interconnectedness of humankind, of societies, of economies. The stonecutter fails to see there would be no stones to cut if there were not a community building a cathedral. The third stonecutter embraces a broader vision. Interesting, I think, that the parable has him building a cathedral, not a castle, not a railway station, not a skyscraper. Testimony in part, of course, to the antiquity of this tale, but revealing in other ways as well. The very menial work of stone cutting becomes part of a far larger undertaking, a spiritual as well as a physical construction. The project aspires to the heavens, transcending the earthbound, and indeed transcending the time-bound as well, for cathedrals are not built in months or even years, but over centuries. A lifetime of work may make only a small contribution to a structure that unites past and future, connects humans across generations, and joins their efforts to purposes they see as far larger than themselves. What is the meaning of this parable for us in this moment at Harvard and at HBS? Why and how do we strive to create stonecutters of the third sort? We have been reminded these past few weeks about the perils of enshrining material reward as the purpose or measure of work. We know we must do better than to create stonecutters like the first man. The second man, though, is more admirable, more like much of our rhetoric, and indeed commendable in many ways. But as I was thinking about giving this speech today, I went back and reread a talk Kim Clark shared with me in 2003, an address he delivered on business ethics in the wake of the Enron scandals. It is a powerful statement about the need for the highest levels of integrity by all business leaders, and about the responsibilities of places like HBS to set and inculcate ethical standards. Yet, as I read it, I was struck that even if everything Kim had called for had been fully achieved, it would have had little impact on averting the crisis of the last few weeks. The crisis we confront has not arisen from any widespread breakdown in individual ethics, though we've certainly seen some failures of personal responsibility and an unwillingness by some to anticipate or accept the consequences of their actions. But essentially, what we have witnessed is a broader and more systemic crisis that has arisen from a failure of wider vision, a failure to acknowledge our interconnectedness, a failure to recognize how one's own stone cutting is inescapably part of a larger project. And though human beings have always been bound together, we have never before been so thoroughly and instantaneously interconnected. As we have learned, a world defined by global markets is a world without boundaries. A crisis on Wall Street has bankrupted Iceland. The third stonecutter reminds us that the individual is not enough, that we want to make a difference in and for the world, as it is today and as it will be in the future. What do these lofty thoughts mean about how we do education for business, as well as how we undertake the business of education? What do they mean for HBS and for Harvard University? For 100 years, Harvard Business School has strived to situate technical expertise within a broader vision, an intellectually curious approach to the problems of business. Leadership that makes a difference in the world, leadership that makes the right difference in the world, must be thinking like the third stonecutter, who doesn't simply look to his left and his right to make sure that he is the best, but looks up and out with his sights on the cathedral. This is a matter of both values and vision, of a commitment to purposes beyond oneself, but also a grasp of wider imperatives and understandings. Leaders are accountable for more than themselves. They must be both willing and able to accept that responsibility. In recent years, HBS has been the subject of innumerable appeals and approaches from other parts of Harvard, eager to enlist the school's expertise and prestige. Everyone seeks HBS's competence and confidence. And everyone is interested in leadership. Leadership in public service, leadership in medicine, in law, in education. Every part of Harvard commits itself to generating leaders. But leadership is a means. It is not an end in itself. It must be about more than the distinction or the excellence of the leaders. A focus on leadership must not become an exercise in self-satisfaction or congratulation. Leaders exist to serve followers, and leaders' successes must be measured not simply by their power to move others, but by the directions in which they take those who follow them. Just as recent upheavals can remind us that a leader must, by definition, be committed to a group larger than herself, they can also remind us that there is an important reciprocity to pursue between HBS and the other parts of the university that have so eagerly sought its engagement. What can HBS gain from its presence within this extraordinary institution? Can the university help Harvard Business School answer the question, where should leadership lead to, and what should it lead for? Or, to return to our parable, how will the stonecutter's perfectly honed stones be used? We can see all around us examples of HBS students and graduates offering their answers to these questions, and we need their skills desperately. We need leaders who will dedicate themselves to extricating us from the financial mess in which we now find ourselves. We need leaders to help us sort out appropriate regulatory structures in the wake of this crisis. We need leaders to help us address the impact of this crisis on families and individuals. We need leaders who will help us organize to combat climate change. We need leaders who can help to deliver the wonders of modern medicine to the tens of thousands of Americans and global citizens in need of basic health care. These are scientific problems. These are economic problems. These are political problems. But they are also fundamentally problems of organization, management, and leadership. They are problems that connect us to others here and across the globe, to our children and our children's children, and the world in which they all will live. They are also problems that occupy scholars, the kinds of problems that are the business of universities. Like a cathedral, a university is a creation of generations and even centuries. It represents aspirations that transcend the instrumental, aspirations that privilege the timeless over the timely, aspirations that reach across societies and nations and centuries, that reach beyond the ambitions or achievements of any single individual to serve larger and more lasting purposes. A university also generates the knowledge and understanding across its many schools and disciplines that can support such a vision, that can not just enable, but compel us to look beyond ourselves. A university asks all its students to be like the third stonecutter. It lifts their sights to the cathedral spire. It reminds them at once of their importance and their insignificance in face of the tasks at hand. It reminds them of the interconnectedness of people across time and space. It affirms fundamental values of universality and of community. It both respects tradition and embraces change. Business education that takes advantage of such a setting has the opportunity to produce not just leaders that make a difference in the world, but leaders who make a difference for the world. That should be the goal for both HBS and Harvard University in the century to come. Thank you very much. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, that was terrific.
Are we posing as we're posing?
Thank you, Drew. Thank you for those great words, and thank you for being a great leader in what's a very important time for this university.
Thank you, Jay.
And thank you.
Thank you.